We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us on this Monday. Speaker of the House here in Tennessee, Cameron Sexton on. Good to have you on. And talking in the aftermath of the COVID-19 omnibus bill, which has been passed but not signed yet by the governor, but it's coming. So when we went to the break, we were just talking about, what the state has done and what it's mandating for, all the cities and counties in the states to move forward with this. For instance, here in Davidson County, you're familiar with Davidson County District Attorney Glenn Funk. On more than one occasion, he has said in different instances on different things that he simply is not going to enforce what was passed by the state. And I think you tried to address that, not just for him, but for all DAs that may choose to do that. What is it in terms of being able to at least temporarily replace these DAs on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, so they do have prosecutorial discretion, which is when you get the case, you look at fact and circumstance, and if they don't want to charge somebody or go to court, then that's their discretion, right? But you have to look at it and have facts and circumstance. What some of them are doing is preempting a state law before anyone's ever committed a crime or before any cases before you. We do not think that you should be allowed to do that.
Meaning he's coming out and saying, I'm not going to do it.
Just say, I'm not going to do it. Because why aren't you going to do it? It's a state law. If you're going to do that, then what are you telling the public about if I'll go do this? Because there's no consequence, there's no anything. And so people do it on different types of crimes. You look at other states in Washington and Oregon and how they're not prosecuting a lot of stuff. There was just an article in the San Francisco Chronicle about, should people get accustomed to people doing home invasions and home break-ins? Should that just be part of life? No, it shouldn't be part of life, right? It shouldn't be. And so if you start down that road, where do you end? And so what we're saying is if it's state law, it's your job to look at facts and circumstances. And if you don't charge somebody, that's great, but you can't preempt state law before there's ever a crime committed. Okay,
and that's because of what they've said. I guess the proof will be in the pudding when something comes up. And like General Funk was saying, I've heard from some people asking me, if a teacher for whatever reason chooses not to allow a student into the classroom, because under the law, a student doesn't necessarily have to wear a mask under certain situations. The general said, look, I don't think we're going to see a Metro police officer going over there to arrest that teacher for doing that. And if they do, I just don't see that ever coming to my desk one way or the other. I guess the question would be then, how is this enforced?
Well, so we have the mechanism in case something does happen. Then the Supreme Court can make a special pro tem attorney general or district attorney to come in for those types of cases in those jurisdictions and prosecute if they want to be, right? I mean, what General Funk is doing is basically he's giving you a hypothetical situation that no one's ever going to break that law, so therefore I don't have to do anything. All right, well, but don't say that you're not going to if they're going to come to you. There may be an instance where you may have to, right? You don't know. But what he's doing is preempting state law. And if he wants to preempt state law, my suggestion is for him to run for the state representative or the state senate and make state law. But his job is to enforce the laws on the book, not to pick and choose which ones he does.
And, okay, yeah. As far as the city council's concerned here in Metro, of course, and the mayor, they're going to be looking at it. They have their legal department trying to sift through this. Some have said that it's a situation where they didn't feel that they think that there are going to be a lot of gray areas in this legislation, that it was written so quickly, or it seemed like from their perspective, it's more haphazard. They're looking at it, and there'll be gray areas that they think will allow, in some portions of it to be bypassed. What do you think? Are there gray areas to this, or is it clear cut, or are they going to be able to find ways to say, no, you know what, we're going to do something different here?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on what they're talking about. Now, what I will say from those individuals in Metro government who thinks there may be gray areas, we'll see what happens. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, so we can take care of any of that if there's issue. But what I can tell you is no government in the state of Tennessee is going to do a mandated vaccine on anybody. There's no government that's going to do a mask mandate without a severe conditions requirement under a state of emergency. No state government or no local government is going to quarantine somebody. Those guidelines come out from the Commissioner of Health. So I understand what they're saying, but at the same time, we put in a lot of things that are very clear about the local government not having power to do something.
And I know you talk about local government and the state government, and again, mainly because you guys handle a lot of the purse strings and the such as well, but I mean, you kind of trump what local government does in a lot of cases. You could say the same thing to some degree with the federal government to states. And I'm wondering, you talked about OSHA, and I know some of that stuff is still being worked out in the courts now, as you mentioned correctly, but there are some that are worried that if, you kind of don't follow some of the guidelines from the federal and state OSHA, is not allowed to intervene, that state OSHA will be pushed out of the background. It will not be the one that deals with these kind of office issues or workplace issues. It'll go over to the federal level. And I know that there's a lot of employees that would much rather deal with OSHA here in the state than at the federal level. Is that a concern?
No, it's not a concern, because we heard that, and so in the legislation we put in the latest OSHA requirements that we passed that now become part of TOSHA. We put those that are grandfathered in. Anything new after that is what we're battling in court. So we don't feel like there's any opportunity for OSHA to come in to take over our state TOSHA program at this point. We're going to file in court. We're going to fight in court, and we think we solved that issue. We think using OSHA to do these regulations, the court was correct in Louisiana for the Texas lawsuit. They can't be used for that as taxation. If they're going to tell the employer or you that you have to test negative to just go to work and they're not paying for it, that's a tax by the federal government, and that's not allowed.
So you don't think it'll be an issue? You think TOSHA will stay in place?
We feel strongly about that.
Would you agree that most of the industry here in the state of Tennessee would prefer to deal with TOSHA than OSHA?
Well, I'm sure they would. They probably prefer not to deal with anybody, but I think they would prefer TOSHA over OSHA. Yes.
That's okay. That's what I figured. Yeah, we're just kind of bouncing around on a lot of this. One thing that I think maybe many people do appreciate, as long as it can be done safely, is you also address the issue of dying alone, which is one of the very tragic parts of this COVID pandemic, where because of the fear of it spreading, you know, oftentimes these patients are left alone and can't be with family members. How did you go about addressing this in a way that you feel is safe?
Well, our intent in the legislation was to put something in place for COVID where if someone's at the end of life, they can have family with them so that they don't die alone. We think that's the compassionate thing to do. That was our intent in the legislation, and a lot of hospitals are already doing it, so it's nothing new.
That's true. Some have started. But
Correct.
The idea being that it would be one individual maybe that could be with them at that point. Is that
right? Just a family member. Right. A family member could be. Right.
And you just feel that's important in that.
Well, it is. I mean, early on, you heard a lot of people dying without any family members there. And that's not the way you want somebody to die. You want them to have at least a family member around, holding their hand and being with them. I think that's the correct way to go. And that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Other items outside of COVID that, you know, also discussed, the idea of partisan school board elections. All right. So I guess, to lay out the groundwork on this, right? When you vote for a school board, you vote for a name, and you don't know whether they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, or whatever. You just vote for a person.
Sometimes.
I mean, well, you could find out otherwise, I suppose. But what's the thinking? You know, I mean, in some communities, you know, the sheriff's races are nonpartisan. Others are partisan. I don't know whether one works better than the other. What would be the idea of making it partisan for school board races, bringing politics into it per se?
Well, there's already politics in school boards. There's already politics in the school races. What I will say is we made it permissive, where it's up to the local party in that county if they want to do it or not. So if they want to do it like the sheriffs, they don't have to make it partisan. But if they choose, then they can. If the Republicans want to do it, they can. If the Democrats don't want to do it, they don't have to, and vice versa. So it's up to the individual party to make that determination in that county. What I will say is, people are already running partisan in school boards. They might not be on the ballot as partisan, but when you get something in the mail, they're aligning themselves with the Democrats or with the Republicans, depending on where they live. And you get endorsements from the state party, you get endorsements from the local party, you get endorsements from elected officials. It is already partisan. So just putting an R or D or an I for independent next to your name on the ballot is not really much different than what you're currently doing. It's just identifying yourself of who you are on election day. So we think going forward that if somebody locally wants to do it, why not allow them to do it?
How do you think that would change things? I mean, people may already know, as you said, anyway. Right. How does that change things, you think? What would that do?
Well, I mean, I think it allows people not to be more transparent about who they are and what their beliefs are. When you're electing someone on the school board, there's a lot of things you want to know. You want to know philosophies. You want to know how they handle money. You want to know where they stand on the issues. And sometimes in nonpartisan races, you don't get any of that information. And so I think it lends some transparency. There's also, when you're dealing with budgets, I think you want to know if someone's conservative, moderate, or liberal, or progressive, depending on how they spend money. That's an important aspect. We think it brings a lot of things to the table that allows the voter to make a better decision on who to vote for.
And you think that in some ways comes around at this point too, because we have seen so many heated discussions and situations, as we saw in Williamson County with school boards and constituents being upset. I don't know whether or not it's Republican or Democrat in some of that instance, but it just seems like it's really come to the forefront here because in a lot of ways this pandemic's been politicized.
Well, I mean, it's been politicized since the presidential race, right? And so what you have is you have parents and moms and dads who go to the school board meetings who are asking for something to be done. And they don't know the philosophy or those individuals on the school board. They don't know if they're Republican or Democrat or independent, and they're not being listened to. Most of what we took care here was because people were not being listened to in the state. School boards weren't listening to the parents. Local governments weren't listening to the parents or to the moms or to businesses. If you looked at the 6 Independent, you asked about that earlier, when Shelby County and Metro shut down all the businesses and raised their taxes through the roof. You had that here in Davidson County. That's a huge issue. We're shutting you down and raising your taxes, and we want you to be okay with it. And so what you had is you had a groundswell of support, and when that happens, the state will get involved.
Take a break on that note. When we come back, more of our discussion with the Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton. We'll get a little more into that Ford deal. It's a lot of money, isn't it?
It's quite a bit.
Pretty sweet deal. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.